Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com program, brought to you by TechStrong and Trilio. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation ahead. First, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Today's session is being recorded. If you miss any of our discussion, or maybe you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session today. If you have any questions, we want you to send those in to us using the Q&A tab. You'll find that Q&A tab on the right side of your screen, where you'll also find a few more options. The chat tab is where we want you to get to know your fellow audience members. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's program, or maybe just from where you are tuning in. And if you navigate to the handouts panel, you'll see a couple of links that we've added for you. You'll see these links throughout the program, so just if you would like to click on them, we've got them there for you in the handouts section. And finally, of course, before we leave, we are giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so be sure to stick around for the duration of today's program. So our discussion today is over the cost of downtime and how to avoid it. And I'm joined by Jeff Ligon, Senior Solutions Architect at Trilio. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thank you, Cody. Hello, everyone. As Cody mentioned, my name is Jeff Ligon. I'm a Senior Solution Architect at Trilio. Trilio is a cloud-native data protection company. We focus on protecting applications in cloud-native platforms. We have products for both OpenStack and Kubernetes. And today, I wanted to talk to you about the cost of downtimes, and how to avoid it. So we're going to be covering a lot of aspects of downtime. So we're basically going to be answering these questions today. Kind of setting the stage of downtime. How often does it happen? What are the various causes of downtime? What are the effects on your organizations? What's increasing the risk? And finally, most importantly, how do you avoid this and mitigate the impacts of downtime? And so we'll spend a good portion of the presentation talking about how you can do that using Trilio solution. So let's begin. So how often does downtime happen? So first, I kind of want to set the stage of the IT landscape. The IT landscape is varied and shifting right now. So as everyone's probably aware, there's the rise of containers and the rise of Kubernetes to orchestrate those containers. So a lot of companies are still in bare metal and VMs today. That shift is increasing. So IDC predicts that by 2024, 70% of production applications will be in Kubernetes, up from 10% in 2020. So the landscape is definitely changing to a containerized world. And but downtime happens across all of these different architectures and platforms. 80% of organizations say that they have an outage in the last 3 years. Almost half of enterprises are saying that this is happening weekly or monthly. I mean, I think everyone is aware that no matter what you're doing, things do go wrong. So it's definitely something you need to plan into your business to mitigate. So what are the most common causes? So the number one cause that people have found is networking issues. These systems have been more dynamic and complex over time, especially, moving to public cloud, and you're talking about different availability zones, different regions. Your application may live in multiple data centers and have to communicate back and forth. You need networking to tie all of this together. And so, whether these are, manual network changes or something that you're planning out dynamically is not working right, that seems to be the number one cause. Human error closely follows behind. There's lots of systems out there for trying to automate things, taking the human error aspect out of that, but at the end of the day, there's still a lot of humans involved in deploying applications, deploying infrastructure, upgrading infrastructure, and sometimes things don't always go right. So you always have to account for the human factor in your automation. And cyber attacks and ransomware, something that's really increased after the pandemic. The pandemic, really saw the rise of IT infrastructure and the dependency of basically all industries on IT infrastructure, and it makes for a big target for cyber criminals. So you can see a stat here that the first half of 2021, cyber attacks went up 93%. I mean, I think we all can appreciate, not a week or 2 weeks go by that you don't hear about some big company in the news that some big breach has happened, whether that's in healthcare or, the finance industry, government installations. Always something that you need to design your systems to protect against. So we talked about the causes, and now let's talk about the effects of downtimes on your organization. So, the number one, lost productivity. Those systems are down. Your business is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And that causes a loss. Most often, that causes a loss of revenue. If your systems are not running, especially if they're focusing towards your customers, that's going to be a loss of revenue. But it's not just that, and it's not just the current revenue. It could be a loss of future revenue, because if your brand reputation is damaged by this, you might have customers that decide not to come back. We've seen a statistic that 40% of these disruptions lead to a brand reputation damage, where customers aren't they're not going to continue to do business with you because of that. And then data loss. So many companies that find, their critical customer information, gets leaked out. And again, that hurts on brand reputation, and it's hard to deal with that. Okay, so what increases the risk of downtime? So, the first being the failure to test your disaster recovery plan. So I talked to a lot of customers, talked to them about their backup strategy and their disaster recovery strategy, and I have found a lot that will admit to me, yes, we have a great backup strategy. But, to be honest, we've never tested it fully. Maybe we've tested certain components, maybe we've tested certain applications, but we've never done an end-to-end, hey, what if my whole infrastructure goes down? And to be honest, organizations need to do that. I mean, that's always a risk. How valuable is that to your business if, to test that, to make sure that you can bring everything back up in the worst case disaster. And some of it, honestly, some of it has to do with the limited investment. Data protection and security sometimes gets put on the last of the priority list. The top of the priority list is let's move the speed of business, let's innovate, let's get new applications out there. Data protection kind of sometimes takes a backseat to that. And sometimes it's infrequent backups. Sometimes you might have a strategy in place, but because of the lower priority, maybe somebody's not taking care of it as well as it should. And those, weekly and monthly backups aren't happening like they should. Okay, so now let's talk about, we're all aware that the downtime is out there and the risks of downtime and the cost to your business. So let's talk about how do you avoid that and mitigate the impacts of downtime. So, kind of 4 components that Trilio sees as being very important to having a good disaster recovery plan is you should have a multi-tenant agentless self-service disaster recovery. So, gone are the days of saying, hey, just, I have a backup admin, let's just push, all of that responsibility to him. You should enable your developers or your various, depending on how you've broken up your different IT responsibilities. Everyone should have a hand in this and being able to help with protecting applications, recovering applications. You shouldn't just have it focus on maybe, 1 or 2 individuals in your organization. The DR process should be very easy. It shouldn't be this, complicated, set of CLI commands that you have to do. You should have a very simple click-driven DR approach to just click through, find your snapshot that you want to recover to, and click go and have that application recovered very quickly. You should be storage and cloud agnostic. You shouldn't be siloed into a solution that only works with one storage provider on one particular appliance, or maybe only, maybe you're going with one cloud provider that has some, one-off service that's not going to work if you move to another cloud provider. So you want to be storage and cloud agnostic in your plans for this. And it should be continuous. Going back to that slide where some organizations are, 33% or admit that they're not, doing this monthly. This should be something that you're continuously doing and have a good regular backup of this. So let's talk about ransomware again. I kind of mentioned ransomware, is a big thing, but we really see this, as a large cost, kind of a worst case scenario for your business. If hackers get into all of your systems, lock down all of your systems, asking for that ransom, that it's a huge cost to your business. And you can see the statistics on how much it has increased both in frequency and the cost that's costing businesses. It's only going to get worse from here. So you've definitely got a plan for this. So in the Trilio, we're focusing our data protection in this cloud native world. So in the Kubernetes world. So we're looking at, what are the entry points of attack? What are the attack vectors in a containerized Kubernetes landscape? And that would be, the APIs, the management console that you're using to deploy your Kubernetes applications. And then the other big vector is the storage media. So, if that storage media that you're being used to storage your backups get compromised, that's another way that you can be taken down. So Trilio has an approach to combat ransomware. So we follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. And NIST has basically set out 3 pillars that they say all organizations should be looking at to protect applications. So Trilio can help in the areas highlighted in green here. So on the identify and protect side, Trilio can help you with application discovery. So we have a nice management console that I'm actually going to be doing a live demo on later on in the presentation, where we can show you, what's been deployed in your Kubernetes clusters. We hear from a lot of IT managers that, I have so many different development teams that are sharing these clusters. Sometimes I'm not fully aware of everything that's been deployed in that cluster. So Trilio can help you find all of those things that are being deployed so that you know what to back up and protect. On the ransomware front, we support encryption and backup immutability. So we support being able to encrypt all of your backups using whatever encryption key that you want to bring to the table. And then we support backup immutability. So that, typically the first thing that ransomware wants to do is to delete all of your backup files. So you have no way to recover. So we have that functionality, backup immutability, that says, hey, once you write that backup file, nobody can touch those files for 90 days, even if you have the admin credentials, or whatever you set the policy for. Role-based access control. So sometimes you want to segregate different personas accessing your Kubernetes clusters depending on their roles. You want to segregate, maybe they only have access to certain namespaces or certain resources depending on their role with the company. Trilio follows those role-based access control principles. So when you use the Trilio solution to protect applications, if a developer user logs in and only has access to one namespace and the application is in that namespace, when he logs into Trilio, he will only see that namespace and the ability to back up and recover the applications in that one namespace. And then on the recover side, this is definitely what Trilio does best. So we have great ways of having easy to use disaster recovery workflows for recovering all of those application workloads that you would have, even if something happens and the entire cluster goes down. I'm actually going to be doing a live demo of that today to show you what that looks like. Multiple targets. So we have the ability that you can store your backups in multiple locations. So we hear that request a lot. Hey, I don't want to put everything in, if I'm a public cloud provider, I don't want to put everything in, US West in one region, because sometimes you might have regional outages. I want to be able to put things in multiple regions to account for that. Or if you're on-prem, you want to have different data centers and the ability to move things around to different data centers so that if you have one data center that has a problem, everything is backed up and living in multiple data centers. So these are kind of 6 aspects of the TrilioVault for Kubernetes solution. So we are application centric. Kubernetes is a different architecture than the traditional VMware-based or bare metal application landscape. Kubernetes is a very dynamic environment where applications are getting spread to multiple worker nodes. Those worker nodes can even be set up to be dynamic so that they can increase and decrease based on application demand. So Trilio, it's hard to, how do you track those applications in that dynamic environment? So Trilio takes an application-centric approach. We follow everything that you're deploying in Kubernetes, both the metadata and the persistent volume data, and then we're backing that up and storing that offsite. So we are infrastructure compatible. We work with any distribution of Kubernetes that's been certified by the CNCF organization. So no matter what cloud you're in today, where you're going in the future, we've got you covered. We have a nice management console, so everything can be done from a nice UI. It's multi-cluster, so you can manage multiple clusters with this. As I mentioned in one of the previous slides, it's got a nice way to discover what you have running in those Kubernetes clusters from a data protection point of view. Shows you what's running, shows you what's protected and what's not protected, so you can take action on that to make sure that everything that you want protected is. It's native to Kubernetes and OpenShift. So it's just a native Kubernetes application that you install in each cluster where you want to have this data protection functionality. And it integrates, there's no other tooling that you need to install. It integrates with the kubectl or OC command line tools. Trilio is truly an enterprise class solution. We have enterprise class features like restore transforms, database hooks, integration with Prometheus and Grafana monitoring. So just 24/7 by 365 support to just know that we are an enterprise class solution for protecting your business. And we're easy to try and install. We have various freemium models, so you can try out Trilio in your own environment to see how it works for you. So Trilio works on any cloud. So whether you're on-prem today, whether you're in one public cloud, whether you're in hybrid cloud, maybe you have multiple clouds today. And we do see, I was at an event with Red Hat yesterday and listened to a talk by a Gartner analyst who said, I think they're seeing something like 90% of large organizations are claiming that they are hybrid cloud today. So you need to, if you're living, 90% of organizations are living in this hybrid cloud universe. Trilio works across all of these clouds and works across any distribution of Kubernetes. So obviously when you're moving across different public clouds, the Kubernetes versions are slightly different. So you need a solution that works across all those distributions. And any application. So there's many ways to deploy applications in Kubernetes today. There's YAML-based approaches. You can use labels to differentiate your microservices. You can use namespaces to segregate clusters. Or you could use more advanced things like Helm charts or operators. Trilio can follow and back up any of these application types that you might deploy into Kubernetes. And any storage. So we are storage agnostic. You might have, various storage vendors that you're using on-prem or in the public cloud. We support all of these various storage applications. So here's just a high level of how it works. You have a Kubernetes cluster running an application. That application has various Kubernetes objects. There's various metadata objects like deployments, pods, secrets, config maps, routes. And then you might have some persistent volume aspects to your applications that are living in PVC claims. So there's persistent volumes. You install Trilio into this cluster. Trilio then grabs all of that application data, both the metadata and the persistent volume data, and writes it out externally to the cluster. And that can be on any storage that supports the NFS or S3 protocols. So then with your application protected offsite. Something happens to that application in that cluster. Maybe there's been a change that wasn't authorized. You need to get back and roll back to the version that was the correct version. You could then restore that application back into the same cluster. So either into a new namespace or even to the same namespace. And then in another scenario, the disaster recovery scenario, maybe something has gone horribly wrong with that entire cluster. That entire cluster has gone down, and you want to do a disaster recovery to a second cluster. This could also be used in a different use case for application migration. Maybe you have different levels of promoting application. Maybe you have various dev clusters, and then maybe from dev, maybe it goes to a staging cluster where it lives for a few weeks before it eventually gets promoted to production. So Trilio can help you easily move those applications around those various levels of test, dev, and production. As I mentioned, Trilio has a nice management console for managing multiple Kubernetes clusters, having simple workflows to create your backups, execute restores, and then quick ways of monitoring. So after you've got everything set up, we give you various monitoring tools for seeing, are those backups happening as they should be happening based on the schedule that you've determined. And then easy click-driven approaches in the case of that disaster that we're talking about today. So you've got that downtime situation. You need to quickly get that application up and running. An easy click-driven workflow to do that. So I'd actually like to switch over and show you a live demo of what that looks like. So I'm going to show an example Kubernetes application that's running in Red Hat OpenShift. So there's various teams that are sharing this cluster. I've got an application that's running in the Jeff project, which is the Jeff namespace. You can see I've got various deployments. I've got various pods. I've got some persistent volumes storing my database data in a MySQL database that's running in Kubernetes. And then I've got some routes. So these would be the routes that's exposing my application. So if I click on this route, you'll see here's my web application that's promoting some Trilio activities that's going on. So then in my second tab, I've got a secondary cluster. And so, for the purposes of this demonstration, I want to use this as my disaster recovery target. This is a cluster that I have in case something goes wrong with that first cluster. It's a cluster that I could, restore my application to get back up and running. So for this case, I've created a restore namespace that's ready to go to accept that in case of a disaster. So you can see there's nothing running in it. There's no deployments and no pods and no persistent volumes. So now let's show you the Trilio interface. So the first step of the Trilio interface is to log in. You can log in various two methods using the kubeconfig file. So this is the same authentication method that you're using on your CLI for kubectl. You can simply just upload that file, or you can integrate with any OpenID service. So whether that's an on-prem LDAP service or whether you're using some other SSO provider like Google, Microsoft, LinkedIn, GitHub. So here at Trilio, we use the Google G Suite for our corporate sign-in. So I'm using my corporate login, which is then associated with a Kube admin role. And so now I'm able to log into Trilio to start looking at my clusters to start setting up backups. So as I said, this is a multi-cluster management console. So I'm managing 6 clusters from this one interface. So I'm managing and a mix of both on-prem and public cloud instances. So in this case, I'm managing 2 on-prem OpenShift clusters. I'm managing 2 Microsoft Azure clusters and 2 Google Cloud GKE clusters. So if I go to the backup and recovery section, let's look at that demo cluster. And let's look at, so as I click through these clusters, you can see the middle section is changing. So I'm able to see all of my namespaces in those clusters, and I'm able to see it with a data protection focus. So it's showing me in green which of these namespaces are protected and which ones aren't. So you see in this this OpenShift cluster, the Jeff namespace that I have that application that I want to protect, you can see it's protected, but some of these other namespaces are not protected. So maybe if I was a manager of this cluster and I knew some of these other people on my team, I need to go tell them, hey, you should set up backup plans for these namespaces because it's not being protected right now. And so, as I said, where are these files being protected? So we're storing this offsite. In this particular case, I'm storing these backups in an AWS S3 bucket. So I have an OpenShift cluster running on-prem in my data center, but I'm using an AWS public S3 bucket to store those backups so that if something goes wrong in my data center, I've got a good place to restore to. And as I mentioned, I could set up multiple targets for this. So I could set up an S3 bucket in US West and one in US East so that I could even account for regional problems in the public cloud provider. So I've got so let's look at the details of that backup plan. So to create a backup plan, you can either do an application backup plan. That would be whether you wanted to protect a set of labels or a particular Helm chart, or you could do single namespace or even multi namespace. So if you had an application that spanned multiple namespaces, you could set up one backup plan to protect all of those namespaces with one backup plan. So if we take a look at the backup plan that I set up, it was a single namespace backup plan. So I'm using it to protect that Jeff namespace. I'm specifying which AWS S3 bucket I want to do. And then I've got various options, whether I want to encrypt these backups. I can retain Helm charts. So if I have Helm charts that were used to deploy these applications, I can actually back up that Helm metadata so that you can restore the Helm charts as they were. I've got various database hooks. So in this particular case, I'm using a MySQL database. So it's important when you're backing up databases, it's important to properly quiesce databases so that you're getting a good application consistent snapshot of those databases. So we support a wide range number of, Postgres, MySQL, Cassandra, wide range of databases that you might be using in Kubernetes. So I've added a hook for MySQL. And then I have various scheduling policies. So, in this particular case, I'm doing a daily backup. This could be weekly, monthly. It's completely configurable based on your business needs. And then I have retention policies. You can control, maybe I want to do daily backups, but maybe I want to, have a monthly policy that cleans up everything but the last 10 backups. So I'm doing a retention policy that says, hey, I just want to keep the last 5 backups to have a rolling backup of that. So now that all my backups are safe in that, so you can see all that needs to happen is this other cluster just needs to be able to see that target. So I've got that same target defined in the second cluster. So now let's simulate a disaster and show how Trilio can help you recover from that disaster. So I'm going to close this first tab of this first cluster. From the Trilio interface, I'm going to disconnect that first cluster. So I'm just simulating a disaster here that this cluster has gone down and I no longer have access to that. So now I've only got this secondary cluster. So now I want to execute a disaster recovery to that cluster. So we have a nice disaster recovery console. You can see I can do a recovery to any of these clusters that I'm managing. I want to do it to this secondary Red Hat cluster. So I'm going to create a new disaster recovery plan. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to select that S3 bucket that has all of my backup files. You can see here, I'm actually this S3 bucket is actually being used to back up 3 different clusters here. So I want to pick that first cluster that had the disaster. Now we go to our advanced options. So you're able to pick your exact restore point from the list of backups in that backup plan. Then you're going to choose the namespace that you want to recover to. So I want to recover to that Jeff restore namespace. We have various options here. So we have, I'm not going to go through all of these, but a simple quick one is maybe you wanted to say, we give you the ability to fine tune, maybe you don't want to restore everything. You have a full backup of everything, but maybe I had a change to the config maps and I just want to restore the metadata, but I don't need to restore all of the large persistent volumes. So I could just easily check this box to say a metadata only restore to accomplish that. And then we have transform components. So this is where you can fine tune. This becomes particularly useful if you are going from one type of cloud to another. So if you're going from OpenShift to a Microsoft Azure cluster, you might need to change things like storage class, ingress. Those change between those different Kubernetes distributions. So we give you an easy way to transform those components from one to another in one easy step so that when that application gets restored, it gets restored properly. So I'm actually going to show you what that looks like, because in this particular case, I had an ingress endpoint that pointed to a domain that lived in that first cluster, but doesn't exist in the second cluster. So I need to change my ingress to point to that new. So I'm going to change the host route, and I'm going to change it to something that's in the domain of this cluster. I'm going to apply that. And then we give you a nice ability to kind of check and see what that's going to look like. So our software has a feature called target browsing. So you're actually able to browse all of the data that's living in that target. So if you actually wanted to go through and see all of that metadata that you have in there, we actually even give you the ability to browse into the persistent volume. So you can actually go and it'll show you the persistent volume, show you the file structure of that persistent volume, and you can actually restore individual files that way. But in this case, the target browsing feature, what it's doing is it knows the YAML for that ingress, and it's showing you here's the change that you're going to make. I'm going to change my ingress route from this domain to this new domain. That looks good to me. I'm going to close that out. I'm going to add that transform. And now there's just a big blue button here for executing it. So now do you want to start this disaster recovery? I sure do, because the clock is ticking. I want to get that application back up and running as quickly as possible. Okay, so while that application is being restored, I'm going to switch back to the slides. I want to talk about some other aspects of disaster recovery. So we're introducing a new feature. We're introducing this at the KubeCon trade show next month in October. And we're introducing this new feature to TrilioVault called continuous restore. And, why are we doing this? So, you have, as I mentioned, companies are going more to this multi-cloud strategy of deploying applications in Kubernetes. And that's placing, if you're running things in multiple clouds, you're having to operate and migrate apps between these different clouds. That's just going to put more demands on your RTO times for disaster recovery. It's going to be even more difficult to recover these applications because of the increased complexity. And so what exactly does that mean? So you've got this storage data living at multiple sites. So when you want to recover that, there's the time aspect of moving that data from one site to another. These persistent volumes, if you have multi-gigabyte, multi-terabyte volumes, it's simply just a matter of physics of how long does it take through network latency and through connections, how long does it take to move that data? And so we've rethought this process to say, how can we really increase, improve that RTO time? And so we're introducing this feature called continuous restore. And what we're doing here is you've got a cluster. It's using Trilio to back up that application, that set of applications, and it's storing it to that backup repository. But now what we're introducing in continuous restore is this concept that, you're planning your disaster recovery ahead of time. You know what clusters you want to go to in case that first cluster goes down. So wouldn't it be nice if you could pre-stage that data in those target clusters? And so that's exactly what we're changing. So now in your backup plan, you're able to specify a target cluster that you want to go to. So now when that backup takes place, it's going to then reach out to those target clusters and pre-stage that data on those target clusters. And as the next backup happens, you're then going to pre-stage that next snapshot. And the third backup happens, you're going to pre-stage that third snapshot. So now when the disaster happens, that first cluster goes down, and you go to one of those restore clusters, all of that data is just sitting there ready to go. You execute that restore, the RTO time dramatically decreases because all that data has been pre-staged and ready to go. You just deploy the metadata, the deployments, and the pods, they spin up, they go to connect to those persistent volumes. Those persistent volumes are already there, and your application gets running, gets back up and running very, very quickly. So again, just to recap, the TrilioVault data protection platform. This data protection platform was designed from the ground up to be designed for the cloud. It was designed to live in this hybrid cloud infrastructure, universe that we're going to, containers, container orchestration, whether you're an on-prem today or public cloud. It's an agentless solution, non-disruptive. This is not something, there's no sidecar containers. Back in the VM world, you would have to install agents in each of your VMs. It was going to disrupt your application. Typically that's why you have these backup windows that happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, because it might affect your application. Trilio is completely agentless and completely non-disruptive to the application. It's running in the background. The application, doesn't even know that it's there. It's multi-cluster and multi-tenant. I kind of showed you that in the demo today, how I was managing 6 different clusters that were all a mix of 2 different public clouds and 1 on-prem data center. And it's multi-tenant. I showed you the view, the view that I used in the demo was from a Cube admin point of view. So you saw that I had access to all of the namespaces. But Trilio follows the role-based access control principles of Kubernetes. So if I was a more limited user that only had access to maybe just some of those clusters and maybe just certain namespaces in 1 or 2 of those clusters, then when I log into Trilio, I still get all that great feature and functionality of setting up those backup plans, setting a schedule, able to execute a disaster recovery workflow. I get all of that functionality, but only for the cloud, only for the clusters and tenants that I've been given access to. So so if you're designing this to work in a multi-tenant universe, Trilio integrates nicely with how you're designing that. Self-service UI integrated. As I was mentioning, that limited development user has access to do everything that typically in the old days, only the backup admin or the storage admin had the ability to do those kinds of things. Now we're opening it up so that all of the users can do that. Scalable. So, Kubernetes was designed to be scalable. Applications today are meant to be designed, so when that peak time comes in, or, your business is launching a new product and that website traffic is going to spike on the day that you release that new product. Kubernetes was designed for this. It's designed to scale up, scale down, and you need a solution that was designed to handle that. Trilio Infinite, it grows as your cloud grows. And I haven't mentioned that we store everything actually in an open universal backup schema. Some other solutions that were designed for this, they do, vendor locked in, proprietary backup files. So you have to use special software to open up those backup files. Trilio is not like that. We store everything in open formats. We feel that the customer data is always your data. You should be able to read that data, copy that data, do what you want with your customer data. Okay, so let's go back to the disaster recovery. Let's see how my recovery is going. So I go back to my status screen. Everything has been recovered. So now let's go back to the OpenShift console. So this was that restore namespace that, if you remember before, everything was zeros here. There was no deployments, no persistent volumes. You can see that I now have deployments. I have pods, I have persistent volumes, and I have a route. And that route was that transform route that I gave it. And now if I click on that, I'll see that, yes, my application has been recovered from that disaster, and I'm back up and running again. Okay, that concludes my presentation today. So I'd just like to point out that in the handout section of this webinar, you can find an infographic that goes over, that reiterates all of the downtime statistics that I showed today earlier in the presentation, if you'd like to go back and review those. And then also in the handout section, we have links to the Trilio website, where you can request a demo. We can get in touch with you to talk about how Trilio would fit into your own enterprise environment. Or you can download a free trial and try that out in your own environment. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, Cody, I think we're going to go over to the Q&A section now, I believe.
Awesome, Jeff. Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have just a couple of questions, so let's take them from the top. Does TrilioVault's dashboard offer a single pane of glass visibility across the clusters to platform managers? Sorry, it moved out of the way and I missed the end.
Yes, it does. It is that single pane of glass that some Kubernetes distributions don't even offer a UI. Everything is CLI driven, which is fine for a lot of development teams. But others, they want to have that graphical view of, hey, as I mentioned, you might have different CLI tools from different development teams that are deploying things into Kubernetes, and how do you visualize what that is? If you're managing multiple development teams, how do you have one pane of glass that shows you everything that's been deployed in that cluster? And that's what Trilio can accomplish for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So what will be the unique selling proposition for a Trilio to provide a business continuity plan?
So business continuity plan, you need to have good details about what a lot of this talk today was about, how you're going to mitigate that downtime. What are you doing in your infrastructure to ensure that it's being backed up, to ensure that business continuity? So you need to have things like good backup plans and a good way to show that you have those backup plans. Sometimes there's compliance requirements to show, hey, I need to show, how many backups I have. How often are these backups? How long am I keeping these backups from a retention point of view? And so Trilio is a tool that can help you do all of this. You can have various ways of doing reporting to show that you have all of these backups in place. Retention policies are set correctly. You have a DR policy in place that's been tested on your network to ensure all of this business continuity.
Great. So I'm seeing one more question. So I'm just going to announce to our audience, please send in any questions you've got. We've got plenty of time to address them. So our next question reads, what if I'm using built-in snapshots to back up my applications? Is that enough?
So I hear that question a lot. So a lot of people think that snapshots are enough to recover your application. And that's simply not true. I have talked to a few development teams that claim they get by on it. And then when you dig into the details, you realize it's a really simple application. There's just a few persistent volumes. It's easy for that team to stitch that back together. But when you have hundreds of persistent volumes, multiple clusters, that solution of doing your backups purely from snapshots, it's not scalable. It might work for small development environments, but when you scale up to production-ready enterprise applications, that backup is not going to scale to have the expertise, the time it takes to stitch those applications back together, point them to the right persistent volume, point them to the right snapshots. It just doesn't work in scale. So you really need a solution like Trilio to do data protection properly in Kubernetes.
So is Trilio able to restore from, let's say, a failing EKS cluster to a GKE cluster?
Yes, that is one of the strong suits of Trilio. So in this multi-cloud, I mean, we generally, what I hear from customers is when they do multi-cloud, typically it's not for that scenario. They're not using two clouds typically they're separating it by application. Certain applications are going in one cloud, maybe certain applications, and then you want to do DR from different regions or different, availability zones, that type of thing. But if that is something that you want to actually be able to recover from one cloud to another or migrate, I mean, we see more of that. We see more of the migration. Hey, I started in AWS for whatever reason, I want to change to another cloud provider, I've got all of these applications deployed. How do I easily move those applications from one cloud, from AWS to Azure? Trilio is a tool that makes it very easy to do that. So whether that's from a migration point of view or from a disaster recovery point of view, Trilio can help you in both of those use cases.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. So I'm not seeing any more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump forward a little bit, give away a couple of gift cards, and see if our audience sends in any more questions over the next couple of minutes. So our 4 winners of our 4 $25 Amazon gift card drawing, we have Jyoti L, Allison K, Mark L, and Emily S. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your email inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see an email, please do check your spam folder. I'll also take this opportunity to remind everyone that the session was recorded. So following this program, you should receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can find the recording living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and just be sure to look in the on-demand section. All right, Jeff, I'm not seeing any more questions at this time. So do you have anything you'd like to say before we close out? Any parting words?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity today, Cody, to speak about this. I think it's an important topic that as I mentioned, I think some enterprises, maybe aren't prioritizing data protection as high as they should because, they're focused on their business. They're focused on moving things forward. But, you need to make sure that everything is taken care of and you're accounting for that downtime. You're accounting for what happens if things go wrong. So I just want to remind everyone to and I hope I've kind of highlighted that today for everyone. And if you think Trilio might help you solve some of these challenges, feel free to reach out to us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. We really appreciate all the time that goes into putting together the demos, the slides, and the whole package. So thank you so much for your dedication.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
I'd like to thank Trilio for sponsoring today's program. And to our audience, thank you so much for attending. We ask that you fill out a brief survey that should pop up on your screen as soon as we close out. But otherwise, we hope to see everyone at an upcoming Tech Strong Learning program. Everyone, have a great rest of your day. Jeff, thanks once again.
Bye, everyone.